Seven chords. In my opinion, one of the most incorrectly used chords out there. It seems to me that a lot of times I hear them as transitional segues in really bad sitcoms, or in the music that they play while they describe the sound effects in pharmaceutical drug commercials. But there's so much more than that, and I want to talk about what goes behind a 7 chord and how to make them in different ways. Now, when you see a 7 chord, like a G7 or an A7, it's actually shorthand for G dominant 7, which is different than G major 7 or G minor 7, anything like that. So I want to talk about why it's so dominant. What's so dominant about a dominant 7 chord? So if you have a G, let's take the easiest one to play is G. This is the first fret on the high E string. You can play the bottom 4 strings like that, or you can kind of make a traditional G and then switch it here. Now what's happening is we're just altering one note in a G chord. When you're first playing, you might think this is in the key of G, but the thing about a 7 chord or a dominant 7 chord is if you're playing a G7, musically you cannot be in the key of G. And the reason this is because of music theory. So if you have a G7 chord, you're actually in the key of C, musically speaking. That doesn't mean that's the only place you can use it, but I'll explain why that is. So a G major chord is a G, a B, and a D. So if you're in the key of G, you'd have a G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Those are your notes. And what a 7 chord, any kind of 7 chord is doing is it's taking the first, third, fifth, and 7th notes of that key and combining it. So if you're in the key of G, you took the first note is a G, the second note is a B, or the second note of the chord, so the 1, 3. The 5th note is a D, and the 7th note would be an F sharp. Now if you combined all those notes together, you would get a G major 7. But what a dominant 7 is you flatten the 7th note. So instead of having an F sharp in there, I have an F. So G major 7, which would be in the key of G, or G dominant 7, G7, has a very signature sound. Major 7, dominant 7. Major, major 7, dominant 7. So in different keys, the notes will line up to give you that F in a different key. So let's go to the key of C real quick, which the notes are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now, if we were to take C's chord, we'd have a C, an E, and a G. And then if we add the 7th note, we'll have a B, which would give us a C major 7, or a couple different voicings. Now, if we did the same thing with G, we start on G's note, which in the key of C, G is the 5th note, okay? So if we start at 5 in the key of C, we'll start with G's note. G's gonna have a G. If you skip a note, you'll have a B, and skip another one, it's a D. It's a G, B, D. That makes a G major. So G major is actually the 5th chord in the key of C. Now, if we were to add the next note in the key of C to G, the 7th note from G, with these same numbers, you would have an F. Now remember, when we did it in the key of G, we had an F sharp. But now we have an F. So if we play those notes together, that's how you achieve a dominant 7 chord. So, in any key, the 5th note in that key is going to be where the dominant 7 chord resides. So it's a good thing to kind of at least be able to count off musically in any key you're in where that note is. And then you can actually use it in more creative ways. If you want to use it as a 5, use it as a 5. Traditionally, use it as a 1. You can kind of like actually break these rules once you know them, and it makes more sense when you break them. So, for example, I'm going to play the notes in the key of C starting on a G. So G, A, B, C, D, E, F, not F sharp, and back to G. Now, scale-wise, this is actually a different mode. It's called the Mixolydian mode. So if we were to play those notes in order, an arpeggio of it, it'd be G, B, D, and F. Okay? And knowing this, we can start making different shapes. And that's why we're going to talk about some different voicings of a dominant 7, so it's not always the same. Now, the most traditional one I usually see bar chord wise is like this. So it's just really taking a major bar chord and then removing your pinky. And what that's doing is it's freeing up this note and playing this note, which as we just saw was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The dominant 7, otherwise known as the flat 7. Sometimes you'll hear, oh, like G with a flat 7 is a G7, which is true. But a different voicing you can do that's kind of cool that you see in like cool jazz songs and wherever is this one right here. Now I'm playing the G. I'm actually skipping the A string. I'm not going to hear it. I'm going right to that 7. So there's a G and the dominant 7, or G and the flat 7. And then I'm adding a B, which is really the third of G, but an octave up. And I'm just playing 3 notes. So what I have is I have a G, an F, and a B. So what's happening is the 5 in this chord, you'll notice there's no D in this chord. And most G's are supposed to have a D in it to make it a major chord or a minor chord or whatever. But we're implying the D in this instance. So it still sounds most of the way there. So it still counts as a G7. And now these are movable shapes. So this is a G sharp 7, A7, A dominant 7. A lot of people play A7 like this. So these are all different voicings of what we can do here. Now, again, the easiest one to do is a G7 like this, where you just hold this down. Now, if you think of this as a movable shape, say we want to play G sharp 7, let's move it up a fret and just bar the other ones here. So you can think of this as being the 7 that you need to add to a chord. So what I mean by that is like, okay, here's a regular G major. If you think of your root note, because this is a G, and G major, if you think of your root note as being right here, and backing it off 2 frets, that'll always give you the flat 7 of any key. So if you're looking for a 7 chord, you can track the root note that you're looking for. Like let's say I'm looking for a C7. I know that the 8th fret here is a C. I can back it up. That'll give me C's flat 7. And then I can just bar it like I would be here, but the fret's doing it. So it's a pretty easy chord voicing. You just kind of have to hold down a few chords. It's kind of like a mini bar chord, I guess, that you can use anywhere. So we've got a couple different voicings. We've got this new one here. We've got this one, which we can octave up. And then we'll do another one, which is going to be if you're rooting on the A string. So let's actually go all the way down. 10th fret on the A string is another G, right? If we have a regular major bar chord, there's G major. We got to turn this note into this note. There's that 7 again, all right? So we can do that. And actually, we can do it as a bar chord like this. Which, if you're playing acoustic guitar especially, that can kind of put some pressure on your hand. So maybe we want to make this easier. Let's just do it like this. And again, we can imply, using a 3-note chord, we're implying that 4th note and making that a 7 chord. And again, these are all movable shapes now because there's no open strings. So here's a 7. And now we can move this all over the place. So knowing music theory and knowing how to come about a 7 will help you make any chord in any spot on the guitar that you want. And the last thing, so what's so dominant about a dominant 7 chord? It's kind of a weird name. Something I thought of for a while too. Now, the reason it's called a dominant 7 is because it occurs, like we talked about earlier, on the 5th note in a scale. So again, if I'm in C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's G, right? Aside from the 1 note, there's a pull. There's a musical pull to the 5th note in any key. That's why in a lot of songs, if it's in the key of C, there's probably a G chord in there too, because that 5 chord, that 5th note, pulls you musically a lot. So it's a very dominant sound inside of the key. I guess that's the way that I like to think about it. So the reason it's called a dominant 7 is because it occurs on the 5 in music theory. You don't always have to use it on the 5, if you know what I mean by saying that. But that's where musically it fits the best. Now again, knowing all this, now you can make more creative decisions. Like I know a lot of blues players treat a dominant 7 on the 3 chord. So again, what that means is if I was in the key of C, my third note is an E. So the chord would be E minor. The 7 chord would be E minor 7. Now, some players treat that as if that were a dominant thing. So I'm going outside of the key, but I'm going to play that E as an E7, E dominant 7. Okay, so I'm going to add that to my other chords. So I can have 2 7 chords in the same thing. I'll start with a regular C major, G to maybe A minor, to an E7. And that sounds fine. It sounds kind of like interesting, but that's just one way of creatively using music theory to make up your own interesting chord progressions, just like that. So that was just like a 1, 5, 6, 3 chord progression, but that 3 isn't a traditional 3. It's not an E minor, it's an E7. So knowing all these rules can give you an identity as a player, and that'll make your chord progressions sound differently. And once you know these things, then you can kind of like isolate how to make a song sound more like your style of playing. So it's really important. Dominant 7 chords. There you go.